So welcome to our last Westminster. Excuse me. Let's try that again. Take two. Welcome to our last Westminster Wednesday. And tonight we're turning the tables, and I'm going to let my good friend and colleague at Westminster Choir College, Rider University, teaches in the musical theater department. I thought I would let him sit in the host seat tonight. And we'll talk a little bit about my career of singing and my transition into teaching and how wonderful and fun and fulfilling that's been for me. So I'll turn it over to you, John. Thanks so much for hosting.
Thank you, Brian. And if this looks a little different, it's because we thought it would be fun to have this conversation here in person. So that's why we've got it in this lovely room. We're in the Price household. My parents' house and their music room, and so we're joining you this way just so we can have a little bit more of a casual conversation. So we really appreciate you all joining us. As Brian and I were talking about what this should look like, one of the things we were thinking about was how to talk about your career and make sure that people knew just how extraordinary it's been, but also to talk a little bit about the interesting journey you've had and are having, and we were looking for a structure for that. And in the last month or so, Brian learned that you'd be presenting at the International Congress of Voice Teachers up in Toronto.
Looking forward
along
to that.
with my mom, Dr. Kathy Kessler-Price.
Yes.
And the structure of that is going to be on the many acts of a professional career. And it's looking at the different stages of our career as acts in an opera. And since, as you will hear in a second, Brian has spent a lot of time doing French opera, we thought that 5-act structure made a little bit of sense. So
maybe ambitious, but I mean, it felt natural, so let's go with it.
So we're going to approach the conversation that way. But first I wanted to do what Brian always does, which is to let you know a little bit about him. So I'm going to share some of his bio. And this, believe it or not, this is the highly abridged version of his bio. Praised by the New York Times for his unflagging stamina and impetuous abandon during his 2012 Metropolitan Opera debut as Aîné in Les Troyens, Bryan Hymel went on to be awarded the Metropolitan Opera's Beverly Sills Artist Award for his achievements in the production. He is also the winner of the 2013 Olivier Award for Outstanding Achievement in Opera for his trio of performances in Les Troyens, Robert le Diable, and Rusalka at London's Royal Opera House. An exclusive recording artist for Warner Classics, his first solo album, Héroïque, earned Hymel the coveted Georges Till Prize by the Académie Nationale de Disques Lyriques and the Newcomer of the Year Award from Echo Classique. Most recently, Hymel sang Rodolfo in La Bohème at Opera Las Palmas. He performed with the London Symphony Orchestra in his much-lauded portrayal of Faust in Berlioz's The Damnation of Faust, a role he most recently sang at the Metropolitan Opera. A favorite of the crowds at the Royal Opera House, this proved to be a triumphant return to Covent Garden as Henri after they first produced the 5-act epic, 5 Acts Again, in 2013 to mark Verdi's bicentenary. Bicentenary.
I love it, even better.
It's a different usage than I'm used to. He performed at the Bayerische Staatsoper in Munich as Henri in Les Vierges Siciliennes and as Rodolfo in La Bohème. His career highlights include debuts and return engagements at the world's most accomplished opera houses and festivals. He made his Covent Garden debut in 2010 as Don José in Carmen, and has since returned for performances in Rusalka, Les Troyens, Robert le Diable, and Les Vespers Siciliennes, and Don Carlo. Was that the 4-act or 5-act version?
5-act, of course.
Italian,
again. But not French, but the Italian. Yeah.
Hymel made his widely anticipated debut in 2015 at the Opéra National de Paris for performances of La Damnation de Faust, and returned later in La Traviata and the famed Paris Bastille Day celebration concert, which there is video on YouTube, and I suggest you treat yourself. He made his Teatro alla Scala debut as Don José in 2010, later reprising the role with the Canadian Opera Company, and his debut at the Bayerische Staatsoper, and he returned for the opening night for performances of B.F. Pinkerton and Madame Butterfly. His debut came again in 2010 with Les Troyens, and he returned in subsequent seasons for Madame Butterfly, La Bohème, and as Arnold in Rossini's final opera Guillaume Tell. That is a beast on another level. The new production, staged by Pierre Audi and led by Fabio Luisi, marked the first staging of Guillaume Tell at the Met in over 80 years.
How cool, yeah.
He made his house and role debut as Percy in lyric opera of Chicago staging of Anna Bolena, as well as his San Francisco opera debut in his renowned rendition of Aîné in Les Troyens, there that comes again, that'll come back later, and his Washington National Opera debut as Don José in Carmen. Additional appearances include debuts with the Vienna Staatsoper and English National Opera in Madama Butterfly, the Netherlands Opera in Les Troyens, Deutsche Oper Berlin in Rigoletto, Oper Frankfurt in Edgar, Teatro Municipale de Salerno in Robert Le Diable, Oper Dresden in Der Rosenkavalier, Houston Grand Opera in La Traviata, Santa Fe Opera and the title role of Faust, and his role debut as Arnold in a new production of Rossini's Guillaume Tell at the Bayerische Staatsoper. And there's also a page length of concert debuts and just examples of Bryan singing in every possible venue that you might dream of singing in an operatic and concert career. So welcome, Bryan Hymel, to your show.
Thank you, John. Hey, gosh, it's kind of a lot. Like, I read through it earlier today.
Tell me about it.
And I tried to cut it down. And I was like, yeah, but that's a good part. And I was like, yeah, but it's a little.
They're all good parts.
They're all good parts. You know, it was a great 20 years of my life that listening to it there. You know, it just sounds like a bunch of. I mean, it is just a bunch of accomplishments. But to me, each one of those have memories. So I was like, oh, I remember doing that. Oh gosh, yeah, I forgot about that. That was interesting. And so it's nice because I just, I'm very firmly in, I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm very firmly in the teaching part of my life, and I'm really enjoying that. And it's not that I discredit all those 20 years of singing that I did, but it's just not in front of me. It's not in front of me, and so it kind of, the humblest way a tenor could be possible. It's very humbling and to hear all those things, but thank you for reading all that. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure.
And thanks for doing this for me. It's been a wonderful year. We've had really great guests.
Yeah.
And I just think it's fun to turn the tables and let people know a little bit about me, because maybe some people from the Westminster community haven't been so close or involved in the past 3 years, which has been kind of where I've been there, and it's been my time here. It's been a wonderful time. So
yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
Well, first I think you have a little Price household.
Oh, do I?
Pet fur there.
Great. Did I get it?
You got it. Great. So then, as you often do with your guests, I think we need to start at the begining.
Yeah, sure.
So how did music come into your life? Were you a singer first?
I was not a singer first.
Shocking.
I was not a singer first. When my parents and I went to church, I always wanted to sit. It was one of these, opportunities where the organ is like in the congregation, so you can go sit literally right next to it. And I just was fascinated by my good friend. Well, and not at that time, but would become a dear friend and the godfather of our youngest daughter, Drew Montague, and he would play the piano and play the organ, and I just thought it was the most amazing thing. And so I was really drawn to that. But when I was in school, you couldn't start piano lessons, band, choir, sports, whatever you wanted to do, you couldn't do it until you were in the 4th grade. So I had to wait, and I got a little keyboard, and my parents got me some, kind of pop songs that you could pick out and play chords and stuff with that, and that was kind of my intro to piano. So piano was certainly what hooked me first.
Were either of your parents musical?
No, I mean, I think there's the aptitude, and I think there's the ability. There just wasn't the opportunity to study and buy instruments, which, are not cheap, and all this. In fact, that kind of segues well into my next bit, where I wanted to play the saxophone, but my parents were like, well, we don't have a saxophone. What we do have is a trumpet. So if you want to play the trumpet, go right ahead. So I was like, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I have to say, being from New Orleans, it's not a bad choice. It's kind of like being a tenor in Italy. You're like, you're fine.
Let's say growing up in New Orleans, it's kind of like growing up in a musical family. Even if no one in your family
absolutely. There was
plays.
A great quote that Wynton Marsalis or it came up in the PBS Jazz Ken Burns special, where someone had said, if you hold a horn up in New Orleans, there's so much music it will actually play itself. And I really just feel like that visualization is so apt, because you walk out on the street, or you walk down, especially during Mardi Gras time or down the French Quarter, and music is just there. It's just there all the time, as much as the food and the culture. And, just as an aside, we had the first opera house in the New World in New Orleans. and 3 operas going all at once. Can you imagine 3 opera companies in a city the size of New Orleans? It's unreal. But so anyway, getting back to that, I started playing trumpet in the band, and I loved that. And then I auditioned for the choir kind of on a dare because I was like, I'm not really interested in singing.
Did you play sports or anything?
I did a little bit. I mean, I'm not the most athletic guy I know, but I did cabbage ball, which is like a version of softball where you have a really soft ball and you don't need a glove. But I did that. I did racquetball. I did swimming. I did lots of different things. But I wouldn't say I excelled at any of them in the way that I excelled in music. So at 4th grade, it became clear that's where my concentration was going to be. So I did that and enjoyed that. Went to high school. Was playing in the marching band, still playing trumpet. Then I got my braces on, and that was the first kind of like, whoa, this is no longer so fun, nor can I play like
that'll mess with your embouchure for sure.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, that's going to kind of go on the wayside for a little bit. So I decided to focus more. Oh, and I forgot to say, I did sing as a boy. I sang in a boy choir, and I sang in a church choir. So long story short, I ended up going to choir and enjoying it.
Great.
Although I would say I even enjoyed playing piano for the kids of the choir to sing along almost more than I enjoyed singing. So I was like, I don't know. I just kind of like, I don't know. My parents let me run. They were just really happy to just, support and be wonderful in that way.
So when does like singing as a soloist happen?
So when I was in high school, after my voice changed, so when my voice changed, kind of in conjunction with the whole braces thing, those 2 things went away, and I focused on piano. And so I went to an arts high school for piano. I started playing church music, really like getting a job. I directed at a Lutheran church. I played at Baptist and Methodist church, but my main gig was at a Catholic church. And then I was an assistant choir director and music director all through there. And so that was kind of what was going on with my early first act, if we will. Right? Yeah. So the education and church music were really firmly, that's like my New Orleans era, as my daughters would love, a Taylor Swift reference there. My New Orleans era was firmly, and I learned how to sing opera. I found my voice. So I did sing in musicals, but because my voice sounded more mature, even though it wasn't really, it was more mature than my colleagues or my schoolmates. But they wanted to keep me they wanted to have me sing baritone rap because that's more mature sounding.
Yeah.
And I was like, I remember we did Man of La Mancha and I was like, Hail, Night of the Woeful. It's just so low. I just couldn't do it. But I found my kind of more, the voice that would become my operatic voice when I was doing a funny thing that happened on the way to the Forum, and I was one of the Proteans. And there was one part where you have to like do this kind of arpeggio up to a high A and nobody could hit it. And I was like, I can kind of do it like this. And I literally just took a breath and kind of went for it. And the music director was like, yeah, that'll do. Let's do that. So this is the first time, and it's kind of a funny story. I didn't really, so I finished that. I wanted to be a Broadway conductor because I love playing piano. I love the jazzy music. I love the theater. But I didn't necessarily feel at home being on stage in front of everybody and with everybody looking at me. That just was not, it just didn't come natural to me. For a long time, it didn't come natural. I kind of acquired the skills to be able to do it. But even still now, like, I love to like be a supporting role.
Well, it sounds like you were mostly a pianist. You were an instrumentalist, a musician first.
Yeah.
Do you remember what musical it was?
For which one?
The one where you sing the high A.
Oh yeah, funny thing happened on the way before.
Oh, that
yeah. No worries, you're totally fine. But I did Man of La Mancha. I said I did Fiddler on the Roof. I was Tevye, but again, that music is for a baritone. I did Damn Yankees, where I was the coach, and there was the part where you gotta have heart. So here I am, the coach, but then singing the high tenor part, which is like A flats and B flats. It was completely ludicrous, but it was so fun because and people just kind of. I think they recognized that I had a certain talent and they just let me run with it. Which I think is, music educating is such an important vocation, and I'm so thrilled to kind of be back in that. But very lucky to have wonderful music educators all the way through my career and my life in doing that.
But that's spectacular, though, because I think so many people... if they show aptitude like the kind you are, it's like, oh no, we got to do this.
Yeah.
We got to do this. But, you really got a chance to spread your wings and explore and try lots of different things.
Yeah.
So, all right, So did you go to school for singing? At college?
I did go to school for college.
Okay.
So when it came time for me to apply to college for scholarships, I applied. I played a piano audition. I played a little bit of organ, and then I had a singing audition because, again, you want to get as much scholarship as you possibly can. And they gave me a very handsome scholarship for singing, and they said, okay, so we understand that you haven't done this before, but we think that you have a talent that is undeveloped and raw, and I think with some private voice study, if you do this for a year and you still want to be a Broadway conductor, fine, but we think you owe it to yourself to go through this. And so that's what I did. And I did my first year at Loyola, and I really fell in love.
That was Loyola in New Orleans.
Loyola in New Orleans, thank you, yes. And so I really fell in love with this idea of technique. That's something I still have a real love and passion for to this day. But at that time, I just thought, like so many of us do when we're younger, my voice is a little tired today, or I didn't sleep so great, or whatever. I'm not going to be able to sing too well. Well, then I started to realize that with the technique and with learning certain these principles and pillars of voice and voice foundation, that you actually can really greatly enhance your margin of error. So that if you're not feeling 100%, or if you're sick, you're sick. But if you're just a little bit tired or whatever, you still probably can get out there and do something halfway decent. Yeah. And so that was really interesting. And then I went to Aspen for the summer festival after my freshman year because my undergrad teacher was teaching there. And then I did the competition, and I was going against people from all the big conservatories and all these places. And I was one of 3 winners. And that's and they were substantially older. I was 18, they were like 26. And so at that point,
so did something just crazy happen in that first year of study?
It's interesting because I go back and listen to the tapes sometimes, and I'm like, I could pick that apart pretty easily. But I think people just wanted to be, and the judges, and they just wanted to be encouraging. They wanted to be encouraging. They recognized my talent, and they recognized that there was time for me to figure out more of the technical aspects.
But they heard that there was just this outstanding potential,
right?
And they wanted to identify that and hold that up.
I think
and give you an opportunity to develop well.
I think so, and that's kind of a theme in my undergrad in general, right? Which was maybe a blessing and a curse, or at least a double-edged sword, because it's not that I was trying to take the easy way out or by doing singing, because it just came more easily to me. I didn't have to spend 6 hours practicing piano. I didn't have to do all this other kind of stuff. Learning the languages was a big hurdle, and it continued to be one, especially when I did Russian and Czech and things like this that were, it took me long enough to figure out that an I in Italian is pronounced E, and an E is pronounced A, and an A is pronounced Ah. And I was like, you guys are killing me here. Like, really, I just can't keep all this straight. But, you do it. You do it, and so yeah. But so I had this, and then I was very fortunate, and I did work hard, and I had good teaching to be a finalist for the Metropolitan Opera Awards when I was a junior in college. So I was 20, which is
all right. So just to review. So 17, 18.
Right.
Wanted to be a Broadway conductor.
Yes.
And then 20, 21? Is that?
Yeah, but then I was kind of like, I'm going to give this a real shot.
Yeah, when you were, finalist in the Met competition.
Sure.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable amount of movement in those few years.
It's true. I mean, it's singers, and I think that we see this with these shows like American Idol or, Somebody's Got Talent, you can have a Cinderella story of, wow, that's just amazing voice that has never been mined out of there. And it's completely raw. And if you don't learn how to use it well, you're going to lose it. But you don't see someone who's been studying piano 3 years come out and play Rachmaninoff. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work that way. So it's I'll get to this later, but I love to say, and my good buddy who's Weston, who's out there, he's gonna laugh because I'm saying singing is mysterious, and it is mysterious kind of in this way that these kinds of things can happen. You don't see someone pick up a violin and play Paganini 3 years after they start. It just doesn't work.
Sure, but it wasn't as if you were off just like playing football or
Fair
something
enough.
at the time. You were
Fair enough.
At that point, you had a pretty deep musical education.
And that served me really well for the career
with
and
lots
for
of keyboard
learning.
skills.
Yeah, certainly for learning music, because the learning music, kind of came really easily, and then it became, working the language into my throat and my mouth and my voice, and then kind of getting, the vocalism, as it were, for all these crazy hard stuff. But so anyway, so I finished all that.
So that competition happens, and then it seems, I think the expectation, and certainly I know for me when I was in undergraduate, even graduate school, like, okay, well, if I get to the Met Finals, I'm going to get shot out of a cannon.
Right.
And then the career explodes.
Yeah. And so that didn't happen for me. It didn't happen, I think, for a number of reasons. I know I was too young. And I will say that none of us expected me to get as far as I did in that competition. It was only I feel stupid saying this, but it was only the second competition I've ever done in my life. So I did the one in Aspen, and then I did this one. And it went well. But, I just, in some ways it was great because I was too naive to know what I was up against. And the other side of that is that when I got to the finals and I was sitting in the dressing room backstage at the Met and listening to my colleagues sing and having rehearsed with the Met Orchestra, I was like, you know what? I'm not ready for this. I am not ready for this. I don't know. And I think I'm a really good judge of what I can and cannot do. And I think that's a really, it's part of like a gift, a talent that I was given. But I think it's also something that we as musicians figure out. It's like, oh yeah, that's within my grasp. That I'm not ready for. And I think that's something that's really beneficial for people in life, right?
Oh yeah.
To just know I'm not
perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did that, and that was the first moment, and there were a couple of these moments where I was like, aha, okay, I need to do more work. I need to learn more, I need to go to school, I need to do something in order for me to feel like I'm going to be successful and have what I need in order to be successful in doing this.
So you graduate from Loyola at 21, 22?
Yes, and I was very fortunate to be able to work in places like New Orleans and Opera Birmingham and Grand Rapids Opera, singing Rigoletto and Lucia and Don Ottavio, but singing the tenor roles, lead roles in these shows in respectable regional houses, of which Robert Lyle, who ran New Orleans Opera for many years, rest his soul, rest in peace. He was a wonderful person to me. He gave me so many opportunities. I'm very thankful for him and his belief in my talent. Really was, and his mentorship. I mean, he really was wonderful to me in my early years and later in my career. But giving those again, and that was the second time that was a big aha moment where I was like, I remember I was singing Rigoletto in Grand Rapids, and I was doing the rehearsals, and we were singing out in kind of probably the final room run, and I was like, I'm dying. This role is so hard, it's so high, it just keeps going. And I, quite frankly, didn't have the vocal technique to be able to sustain it. I was 23, 24. I mean, I think it's forgivable. But at the same time, people were, if people say you can do this, you think, I think I probably could do this.
Yeah.
But I had never really rehearsed an opera role that was that long and that high for 3 weeks. And then had to do, I think we did 3 shows. So it was probably like Thursday or like Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, something like that. And I was like, ooh, yeah. By the time I got to Sunday's show, I was really like hanging on. And so at that point, I had thought, yep, time to go back and learn a couple of things more about my technique and solidify this before I launch into trying to do this.
So you end up at AVA.
I ended up at AVA by a long kind of way. I tried going to a whole bunch of other places, some very important New York schools, which I will not mention. Put me on the wait list 3 times. No, I'm not bitter, but anyway.
I think things worked out.
It totally did. But I ended up at AVA in Philadelphia, which was wonderful because it was a tuition-free program. The Met, actually, who had helped me switch teachers once before, helped switch me, give me some lessons that were paid for by a wonderful couple. I got 3 lessons a week for 6 weeks with Bill Schumann. And that is really something. That was my introduction into Bill and to AVA and kind of the whole thing. And so 3 lessons a week, getting those paid for got me ready for the audition. I went down to Philly. I did the audition. I sang okay. I went for it, and I think that won over some people. And Bill, since we had been working together, I think was essentially able to convince the rest of AVA that we should give this kid a shot. Forever grateful to him for doing that. And so I went to AVA, tuition free in Philly. Met some wonderful friends at AVA and some other friends, for my church job and other places that have continued to be friends in my life for then. And so I did that. I did 3 years, a 4-year program, but I studied there for 3 years, and that's really where things started to come together. I mean, Bill had really, taught a number of voices like mine, so I knew I was in good hands as far as that shepherding and knowing the repertoire and all that. And that's when things started to click, and I started to, after the competitions, having made it to the finals or getting encourage awards, and then not making it to the finals for many years, I was then able to go back and make it to the finals and win just about all those New York competitions, which is a rite of passage for anybody who studies up in the Northeast. The Gerda Listeners and Opera Index and the George Londons and all these wonderful Luigi Albanese, Mario Lanza, and even out in the West Coast, the Lauren Zacharys. I was fortunate enough to win first prize in all of those competitions. And so then I felt really like, okay, I'm glad I didn't give up, because I was really close to giving up, because I was in a lot of credit card debt from living in New York, trying to pay for lessons, using the cash that I had in the bank account to pay for lessons and rent, essentially, and then everything else went on the credit card. And after 18 months, I mean, I was in dire...
New York's expensive.
New York is expensive.
Yeah.
And I wasn't living it up. I mean, I was sharing a studio apartment with my best friend from high school. Me on a futon and he in the bed over there. Remember, $1,400 for a studio on 14th Street. But they were great times. And, it taught me that you've got to be hungry for this. If you really want it, you've got to be willing to make the sacrifices in order to get to the place to where, if you're lucky, to where it actually happens. I feel like I paid my dues a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think about the quote we began your bio with, that unflagging stamina, and I think that extends to your tenacity too. As you because I think it would have been really easy, because you did have kind of a dream launch.
Yeah.
Those first few years, things kind of. I think somebody else who didn't have the same tenacity, would have easily said, "Well, I guess this is as far as it goes, and I'm going to go and either resume my first dream of pursuing conducting or go off and do something else." It's like, but there's, clearly something in you felt like this was for you.
Yeah, I'm a fighter, I have to say. And I for a long time I've said that I spent a lot of my ambition on my singing career. But I tell you, I've the tide has turned, and that fire is back in my belly. So I'm really, riding and enjoying that aspect of it. So so I left AVA.
And just as a little timestamp, so if we're thinking about that act structure we were talking about. So Act 1 is really, when you first begin your formal study of, singing, through that whole chapter until you decide to kind of come back to AVA, go to AVA.
Right.
And now we sort of embark on Act 2, which is you start winning all these competitions, and you kind of embark really on an unbelievably successful international performing career. So kind of tell me a little bit about how that got started.
So I mean, it's really interesting, because while I was at AVA, there with some wonderful other tenors in particular, but great singers like Eileen Perez and Stephen Costello, James Valenti, Michael Fabiano, Angela Meade, we were all there at the same time. It was really kind of the golden years of AVA.
Would have been fun to wander those halls.
Yeah, there was a lot of singing going on, I'll tell you that much. But, I didn't get, the role that I sang at AVA that I sang the most after that was Traviata, which I did. It's not one of my staples. I mean, I did it. I think we did 15 of them in Paris or something like that. But, that in Houston and maybe one other place was kind of the extent of my Traviata runs. And I did things like Der Freischütz, which I never did. And I did Don Giovanni, I sang Don Ottavio, which again, if you know my voice, it's not exactly a like a glove kind of role for me.
No.
But I did it, and I'm better for it. But point being is that when I left AVA, the only, or going into my third year at AVA, the only contract I had was Rusalka at the Wexford Festival. And which is a wonderful festival over in Ireland, and it's really respected in Europe and the UK. But that was the only thing I had going on. Now, that third year, I got managed for the first time, and then was able to do a couple of more auditions, and I picked up like a Tosca in Bordeaux. And I picked up a Rusalka in Boston with Boston Lyric Opera. So things did start to go, but unlike some other singers, of my generation, there wasn't a repertoire that was being done that, oh, that's Bryan Hymel's voice. He sounds like that. I don't sound, like so much like a traditional Italian tenor or a traditional German tenor or an English tenor or whatever. I just have my own kind of sound I think that helped me in some ways. It took my career a little bit, my manager, a little bit longer to get some traction, but once it did, I think the unique quality of my voice helped to set me apart of that. So that happened, and then one of the first pivotal moments and contracts that I had is when I did I Puritani in Athens, in Greece. Crazy hard role. I love the music so much, but it's not really my thing. It's just not even at that time.
Yeah, but it sounds like in many ways you're a victim of that incredible potential.
Yeah.
That you could physically do all of those things. And I was thinking about all the singers I've met, the singing I've done. Mm-hmm. I can't think of anybody who I feel like could do Don Ottavio, Alfredo, Cavaradossi, and then do I Puritani. It's like that's an incredible range of things that you were capable of.
I definitely just kind of willed a lot of it through, I just was like, talking about, about tenacity, I just was like, I've got to do this, somehow I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to do it. And so I did, and I remember I sang, there were 4 performances with only 1 day off, which if you know anything about I Puritani, for the tenor and the soprano in particular, it is killer. Baritone too, but the tenor and the soprano sit in a high tessitura that is unforgivable all night. I mean, we're talking, this is the one that infamously has the high F for the tenor, which I only sang kind of mixed one time, and I got away with it in dress rehearsal, but other than that. But I mean, still, we're talking 3, 4 C sharps, 2 Ds, so many high C's that you don't even count them, right? You're just like, eh. And I remember I knew that the casting director for Covent Garden was coming. And they didn't tell me until, no, I take it back. They didn't tell me till after, because they didn't want me to get too nervous. So I met him, and when I saw him at the party afterwards, my heart sank, because I was like, oh no, of all the shows to see, I got 1 out of 2 Ds. I did pretty well on the C sharps. But it just wasn't the opening night, which I felt was like on fire. Yeah. But, much to my surprise, he was thrilled. He was like, you sang so beautifully, so musically. I've never heard this role sung with a voice the size of yours. So there were lots of wins. And because of that, he offered me 3 contracts at Covent Garden, which were wonderful. One was covering Rolando Villazon and Werther. One was to sing Carmen, José in Carmen for the first time they had ever taped an opera in 3D for theater release and DVD Blu-ray release, which was kind of cool. But I was so nervous that I couldn't eat for like months beforehand, because I was like, man, if the camera adds 10 pounds, what does a 3D camera do, right? Like, it's like, oh gosh, it's got to be terrible. But anyway, the point being is I was just nervous, and like José is a wonderful role, but as you know, the aria is a killer. And the last scene, and I mean,
it's at least 2 different tenors. Yeah. As you're going along, you start very, very lyrically, and the duet is a killer. Right. And then, the aria, and then by the end, it's, substantial, big singing. Oh, yeah. And so I did that, and then from there, I was able to, and the same casting director who was in Greece then went to La Scala, and so they were having trouble with their tenor there, and so within 4 or 5 months of having done it at Covent Garden, they brought me to La Scala and made my La Scala debut, and I was like, man, that was tricky. It was a tricky situation, because I was replacing somebody who didn't know that I was coming to replace him. Ooh. And they put us in the same dressing room. Oh, that's nice. And I felt terrible, but I also had just been thrown into this situation. Totally. Like I didn't know what to do. I didn't know the circumstances. I just knew that I was being brought to La Scala to do this. And when La Scala calls, you say, of course. So, a technical question. Yeah. So when you're singing this kind of a spectrum of roles,
Yeah.
You go from doing Puritani to José.
Yes.
Do you change the way you approach singing, or do you just kind of do what you do?
At that time I didn't have the knowledge that I have now. That I probably would have made a little bit of. I would have made some different choices, maybe. So to answer your question, I just did what I did. I knew that I needed to sing one way with a little bit less kind of like breath pressure, let's call it, in order to sustain the high tessitura of things like Puritani, or even the aria Mes Amis or stuff like that. But also, because of the tessitura of where José lies, when you've got some lower notes and like, E flats and E naturals kind of like right in the staff, and G's and C's and stuff like this, like you can't. Like it actually, no, I take it back. It encourages you to kind of give that way in the middle that you don't have to in those other roles because they don't sit there very much. And that's probably, I could have a whole nother hour discussion
totally.
About that. But to answer your question, yes, I was inclined to just give a little bit more. Tenors usually, I think I've been lucky. There's been times where I've been covered by the orchestra, but I had a lot of squealo and kind of ping, and so I could kind of get through there. And anytime I relied on that, I fared better than if I tried to like just essentially push too much air. Let's say that.
So how did Les Troyens come into your life?
Okay, that's a big one, right? So the first time, and again, this became a theme throughout my career. Somebody got sick, and they needed somebody, and so I jumped.
And because you could sing literally everything,
and I could learn music quickly.
Yeah.
So the first time I did Les Troyens was in Amsterdam for Netherlands National Opera, and the person who was going to do that pulled out within, let's say, 3 to 4 months. So I knew there was enough time for me to actually learn it. And funny enough, I just forgot this until we talking about it. I did a video audition of Les Troyens while I was doing that Puritani in Greece. How crazy is that? I guess.
Now, have you ever worked on Les Troyens before?
No, they gave me the aria. They gave me a week to learn the aria and said, this is pretty much the hardest part. If you can sing this, then you're fine. That actually was not true. But I did learn it, and I did. The aria, it's the first track on my, it's not the first track, but it's on my recording, and it's just something that really fit my voice very, very well. So I was able to learn it and sing it successfully, and then work with John Nelson, who again just passed away a couple of days ago. But so I had a wonderful opportunity to sing it there, and it was a new production. Again, Pierre Audi, who we did the Guillaume Tell at the Met, and we had 7 weeks of rehearsal, so I had plenty of time to get that into my body, and to learn just kind of how to pace an epic role like that where the whole show lasts 6 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. There is literally, my first entrance is 45 minutes into the show, and then I'm on for about 25 minutes, and then I have an hour and a half until I go back on stage. Originally written as 2 different operas.
You have the entirety of 6 on Broadway.
Yeah.
The entire show start to finish between your first and second entrance.
Yeah, it's crazy talk. It's crazy talk. But I love that music. It's probably my favorite role to sing. Even aside from just all the nostalgia that and big wins that I had with that show. So the first time I did it was in Amsterdam, and we did it. And again, I was like, we did 8 shows, and they were spaced out pretty well. I was like, I'm so glad this is over because it was tough. It was just tough. It was really intense, but I learned a lot. So all that being said, when Covent Garden called to ask if I would jump in when Jonas Kaufmann pulled out, I said yes, because I knew that I knew the role, and I knew that my singing had come a long way since the first time I had done it, and so I knew it was going to be a success. And I think that, sometimes we get these jump-in opportunities, and, we think, yes, this is my big time to make it, and it can be that, but if it doesn't go well, it can also be the very opposite, right? Like, it really... so you have to take as much of an educated guess and leap of faith as you can. And so that's what I did. And thankfully, we had a really big success in London, which then opened the door for the big success that I had at the Met, which is really what kind of catapulted my career to the next level. Things like opera news covers and the opportunity for the CD the recording and all that came after that. So I think that's firmly, like, what act did we say that was the closing?
So that was the close of Act 2.
Yeah, it was the close of Act 2.
And then we move into now, Act 3 is really...
the international career.
Yeah.
So from there, I remember I went, was it after I think it was after the last Troya I did, and I flew to Jerusalem and sang a concert there. And it was at that point that things became like, the fees like skyrocketed, and it was like, you're now in a situation where you can go and give a concert that's just Bryan Hymel and the orchestra. It's not me and some soloists or whatever. We did that again in Oman, where I went with the Prague Philharmonia. I did at Champs-Élysées in Paris. It was just a Bryan, and Irene, I shouldn't say that. It was just Bryan. I was very happy and proud to have my darling wife, yes. To have her there with me, and Oman as well. And actually, she was pregnant with our second daughter. It was a really sweet time. But yeah. So anyway, so that kind of happened, and then things like Vienna and Paris, I think, was kind of shortly thereafter that, and doing all those things. So that's when we were kind of, just flying high, but also going 150 miles an hour all the time. Like, I remember there were times when I was asked, and this happens a lot in Europe, when you're asked to rehearse on your dark days between shows, and that's tough.
That's
because you've got to worry about getting to the airport, you got to fly, then you've got to go back.
So just to kind of illustrate that, because it's you told me about this before, and it's the craziest thing I've ever heard. So you're in production for an opera somewhere, and there is another opera that you're going to be, that's already rehearsing while you're still in production for this other opera, and on a dark day from performances, you fly to a different city to hop in for rehearsals in a different role.
Yes. Yeah. Honestly, I think I was doing Le Vepse Sicilienne in London and flying to rehearse Carmen in Munich. And don't get me wrong, they don't like beat you up, but you have to be there. They're not like sing full out. It's not a Sitzprobe usually. But you need to do your thing. And you need to show up, and you have to have your mind ready to go. Yeah. You've got to be ready to switch between this role and that role. And it's really easy to say, well, just don't do that. And then your manager's like, well, I got 50,000 good reasons for you to do it, literally. And you're like,
that's persuasive.
That's very persuasive.
Yeah.
And again, it was the kind of thing to where, because I had built my name and my reputation on this tenacity, on this like singing these epically long and high flying tessitura roles, and I had people who I trust, and I don't think I should not have trusted them, but they were like, you're like Superman. You're like He-Man. You're like you can do it. It's not that we think you can do it. You are presently doing it. All you need to do is do everything you can to sustain this.
And in their defense, there's really not a comp for that. The breadth of roles you were able to do, and the consistency with which you were able to do them. And so, it's like, well, maybe Bryan just isn't, subject to the same laws of human nature that the rest of us are.
It's like Placido Domingo. I don't think he's in a universe all by himself, this guy, as far as like what he was able to do. De Stefano very famously said that it was the airplane, air travel that killed his career, right? And I certainly can understand how that can happen. And you can only say no to certain casting directors so many times before they get irritated.
Right.
And then, it's a very tricky game that you start to play at that level that your manager actually plays. And they kind of play with you too. I've been pulled from a stage door after a show by a stage director and taken to a bar across the street and be told, you have to cancel this job because I need you to come to La Scala to sing this. And I was like, my manager tried everything possible to get, we had, the conductor call the intendant, who was a friend of his, and they were like, we can't let him out. We don't have anybody else who can sing this role. And you feel like you're just getting pulled in a million directions. And that's not even to say anything about the fact that we had 2 small children at the time. We still have them, but they're really small at the time. And my wife had put her career on hold in order for us to have this, this family. And we were in London, which at least everybody speaks English there, and Irini speaks English, and I could do that. But when we were in France, or we were in Italy, or we were in other places, and people get sick, and you need to call the doctor, and you're trying to speak another language, and you're trying to find, Ava, who's our eldest, only could have this kind of formula that was only found here, and we had to bring it in the suitcase from the Americans. It just was like, like there's just the normal things that child rearing, especially in the early years, is hard enough as it is. To throw that into the mix to where it's like, sorry, I'm going to be gone for 2 or 3 days, and you're going to have to just handle this all on your own. I mean, I think we both deserve medals for sure, but her medal is bigger than mine. Okay, so anyway, but getting back to the singing aspect, not to put a damper on it, but it worked until it didn't work anymore. And I really think that has a lot to do. I mean, I've had a lot of time to reflect on this. Is the fact that my voice was changing. Perhaps because of some of the roles that I was singing, but I think also just because of the age. It was about 38, 39 when it started to happen. And I still had 3 years of contracts of singing the high-flying stuff. So So
you were still leaving, like who were the sorts of people who were maybe coming before and after you in roles at that point? What kinds of singers?
So let's see. So obviously Juan Diego Flores and I have sung a lot of the same stuff. Like he was the Robert. I know it's crazy to think that because our voices are nothing alike.
The idea that you and Juan Diego Flores would be...
But the Robert Le Diable at Covent Garden was originally put on for him. And then when he backed out, they said, if you don't do it, then we're not doing it. And I was like, well, let me see. And I actually enjoyed it. It was super hard. Probably the hardest role I've ever sung was Robert Le Diable. Second, Guillaume Tell. Third, Les Troyens.
Yeah, but I heard you singing a little earlier today. You were doing some Tosca, and the amount and quality of sound that's happening.
Oh, thank you.
The idea that amount of sound would be able to sustain Juan Diego Flores tessitura is just unthinkable.
And also his technical approach is very different than what I had at the time, and certainly what I have now. Just a much more kind of Kraussian, forward placement, which still functions beautifully and sounds beautiful. And I think a lot of people that sing that kind of music subscribe to that technique because it serves that music better. But you wouldn't see him singing Carmen, right? Right. No. Yeah. So I mean, it's that kind of a thing. But I still had Le Huguenot, which unfortunately I did all the rehearsals and never got to sing the show. I still had Guillaume Tell, which thankfully I was able to do all of those, both in Munich run of 8 shows and the Metz run of 8 shows. So there were ones that if I had a conductor and a stage director, but certainly a conductor who was on my side that could kind of I knew would take care of me. The Le Huguenot that I pulled out of in Paris was heartbreaking because I know I could sing it. I knew I could sing it. I have tapes of me singing it with the orchestra and the Zisproba and stage orchestras and everything else. But the conductor and he just was being as difficult as possible. And so I just said, you know what, then find somebody else. And unfortunately, they couldn't find anybody else.
Oh, we have a little question from Weston.
Oh, there we go. We got our Q&A working. The chat seems not to be working, but the Q&A is working.
So make your way over there. Yeah. What's the role that you wish that you would have sung or role that you hope to sing someday?
Radames and Otello. Those are kind of the things that I just never really got to do.
Well, here's hoping.
Yeah, here's hoping. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, buddy, for that question. Oh, and Irini has that's really interesting, actually. Both times I was called to sing Les Troyens and jump in, I was singing Robert Le Diable. So when I was called for Covent Garden, I was singing Robert Le Diable in Salerno, and when I was called for the Metz Troyen, I was singing Robert Le Diable at Covent Garden. That's a crazy kind of because again, Meyerbeer and Berlioz couldn't really be closer or further apart, rather. But it was really funny how that kind of happened.
They seem to be linked for you.
Somehow for me they were linked.
Cosmically.
Yeah, right, totally.
So we kind of this is happening, you're finding that you are vocally moving in a different direction from the repertoire that you're booked for.
Yeah.
And then 2020 happens. And all of us who were performing or anything that was going on comes to a sudden halt, and lives look very different. So
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit. So we kind of think about Act 3 taking you through this meteoric rise through the operatic stratosphere.
Yeah.
And then Act 4 really starts with 2020 and that coming to an abrupt pause.
Sure, absolutely. So I sang one of the last shows at the Met, The Damnation of Faust, in March of 2020, and then flew home, and then everything closed down. And then I remember picking up my children from school. They were like, "Well, we're going to be closed for 2 weeks, but we'll see you in 2 weeks." And that was the end of the school year.
And then, 9 months later.
9 months later, we're all starting back in September, and I just was like, whoa. I think it was fun for a while for everybody, and then the bills started piling up. And then contracts were being canceled or postponed by years. And so, a certain income, and I wouldn't even say, we lived well, but it wasn't kind of crazy, but the amount of just like monthly responsibilities was really high. We had a condo in Philadelphia that we were renting out, and then nobody was renting it anymore because they were students at AVA who needed to go back. They were international students, so they had to go back home. So that fell on us to have to pay that rent or that mortgage, plus the mortgage at home, plus everything else. So it very quickly became not fun anymore.
Well, the infrastructure you need for that international career, supporting that without an international career is impossible.
Absolutely. And so after thinking, maybe I need something that's a little bit more stable. Not that I hope that we don't face another crisis like this in our lifetime, but who knows? But the point being is that I was like, maybe I should consider pivoting right now. I could still sing. I just had done The Damnation of Faust. Fortunately, there was a window of like 6 weeks where COVID had closed down and opened up again, where I was able to go and sing a bohème in Las Palmas in the Canary Islands. But we were distanced, and we wore masks for the rehearsals and everything. But it was a really poignant experience to sing Que Geli la Manina and not even touch her hand, because I can't touch her. And then when she's dying at the end on the bed, to have to stay 6 feet away. And you're like, it was mirrored so much by, unfortunately, there was so many people who passed away. They weren't not able to be surrounded by their loved ones because we didn't know that much about it in those early days. We didn't know what was going on with COVID. Totally. And, it's kind of where life imitating art and vice versa. But anyway, the point being is that I found my way to your mom, Dr. Kathy Price, and Westminster in the hopes of pursuing a master's, because if all truth, I was thinking about getting a doctorate, and who knows, maybe I still will. Act 5, who knows, right? But I knew that if I was going to get into academia, I needed again. It's a moment where I was like, I don't have everything I need. I have a reputation as a singer. I have a reputation and and a knowledge of doing a lot of master classes and things like that. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, it's different working with a singer 1, 2, 3 times as opposed to over the course of a semester, much less a whole undergraduate career.
I met you at the Voice Pedagogy Institute, which we did online for the first time, and pretty soon after you started pursuing the Master of Voice Pedagogy degree.
Absolutely.
At Westminster. So what made you decide to do that? Obviously it's an online degree, which is super helpful at that time.
Absolutely, that was really helpful because I could do it, kind of at the pace that allowed. And while I didn't have a lot going on, I was able to take sometimes 3 classes in one semester, which is a lot at a master's level. But it was great, and I had the time, and I loved doing it. VPI really sold me. Like for better or worse, this is the truth. I had never had a pedagogy class up to that point. So I took my first voice pedagogy class at 41 years old, after having sung all over the place. And I had been to the doctor and seen like a scope and other stuff, and I'd seen, models and drawings of the larynx and the throat and all this kind of stuff. But if I have to be honest, I was intimidated because I knew that I didn't know what I was really looking at. And I knew that there were other people that did. And I figured if I'm going to be worth my salt, I'm going to learn this stuff. And I think, so VPI, the Voice Pedagogy Institute, which is a week-long institute in the summer, and then the core of the pedagogy courses, the first is voice science, and then, which is all the anatomy and acoustics,
vocal health,
the theories of phonation and all that stuff. So that was wonderful, and that's the first it's also kind of the first day of the VPI.
Of the Voice Pedagogy Institute.
But taking a whole semester of it really kind of made it, your mom does such a great job into making it into manageable bites. I can take this, I can digest it, I can then, kind of put it back out in a way that shows that I have synthesized this information. So that, and then Pedagogy 2 is methods, which Dr. Arneson, Christopher Arneson teaches, and that's all about the study of and all these pedagogues of the past. And he has a great book that Garcia and Garcia II, the father and the son, and Teresk, and all these wonderful people talking about. But it kind of summarizes what they says as opposed to having to read the whole vocal treatise on this and that and. It's like, whoa, that's intense.
Yeah, sort of great teachers on great teaching.
Yes, and I love that, and I think that's really, I think it gave me a different way. I put it this way, Weston. It demystified singing for me in a way that, I love that I had a really organic understanding of singing, and Bill Schumann is very much on the pure vowels. And support and lower larynx, and kind of all good things, right?
Yeah, totally.
That's absolutely now. Does that mean that I always applied it in the way that he would have wanted me to do it? Probably not, but it worked pretty well.
And in all fairness, what you need to have in your head to sing well is not necessarily the same thing you need to have in your head to help someone else sing well.
I agree 100%. And so I think. In being able to break down these different parts, I now think about singing in a little bit more of a, I wouldn't say scientific, but certainly prescribed. I mean, I like to say
maybe a systematic way.
Systematic is great, like a recipe for singing. And we could talk about it a little bit, but I've been just kind of milling all this over in my head, and I had a bunch of pillars, and then I was informed that maybe 10 pillars is too many, and I was like, you're totally right.
That's a lot of pillars.
Weston knows what he's talking about.
It's a very large structure.
But I've settled on 3 pillars and 10 tenets, right? And the pillars, I think, are what are most interesting, because I have realized that so much of what we need to do as singers can be set up and addressed before we even phonate. So I've given away the second one. So preparation is the first, and that's about things like alignment and the breathing and the way that we breathe and the philosophy of how we're going to reach that apoggia, whether it be up and in or down and out or whatever it is, but to have a balanced onset. There's a number of things that you can look at doing before you've even started to phonate. And then once the phonation happens, how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it resounding? Things like that, talking about the structure of the vowel and how that is tied to the resonance, the resonators and all this, and then also the tongue root tension and articulators and, all this kind of technical talk that I didn't really have the vocabulary for at the time, much less the sensation. And now I do feel like as a teacher that I have the vocabulary and I have the I know the sensation, and I can recognize when in another's voice when they're doing it, when they're letting go, and when it's right. And I think
preparation, and then phonation,
performance.
Oh,
so the performance part is that once you've done all that kind of stuff, right, you kind of don't self-reflect while you're doing it. You just do the process. And for me, I toot my own horn for this one thing because I'm very, very proud of my Olivier Award for acting, essentially. Yeah. You can't be a terrible actor and get an Olivier Award. It just is not going to happen, right? Even as an opera singer. But what changed and helped me to become a better actor, but perhaps not as efficient of a singer, was to really get into the words and the drama and the character. Now, had I've been able to kind of synthesize those things together and maybe had a little bit more of the muscle memory. And I since have come, found some language to kind of help, is that like on the outside, I can be really dramatic and really mad, but on the inside, I'm like super calm. And that's not something I would have been able to do very much, especially in a role like Carmen. You just kind of go for it. Especially when you're talking about, slitting the throat of the baritone or stabbing Carmen, or you're being like, she's mocking you, and she's just, I had to really do the best I could to check that character at the door when I came home, because I would just be really angsty and really short-tempered, and because I've been living in that for 6 hours of rehearsals, right? So anyway, so I think the performance and the tenets of that have to deal with performance are really about, intent, and the aesthetic, meaning not just like the aesthetic, but does your body and your face look like what you're saying, and what you're singing, and pretty much that's the kind of way. And again, I don't know that I want to think about it that way, so in such a prescriptive way for singing, but I think for teaching and helping shepherd a student into finding these things for themselves, I think it helps. And I probably came from reading these treatises, and Tetrazzini and Caruso have this book on the art of singing, which is a free download on Apple iBooks or whatever it's called, the Apple bookstore. It's only 75 pages, and the way that Tetrazzini talks about singing is that was the first time I had read somebody write something, talk about singing, that I was like, oh, this is not just like exercises, which the Caruso part of the book is all these exercises, which sure, very helpful, I guess. But what stuck out to me is I never heard someone speak about it in those terms. And then I came across Great Singers and Great Singing. And then I heard a whole bunch of people talk sometimes like completely contradictory stuff, right? Sometimes one would say one, the other would say the exact opposite.
And sometimes the same person inside of the same set of conversations say things that are absolutely in conflict with
absolutely. And so the point being is that I started to take ownership over my own understanding of singing in that way, which has then helped me to build things like that I've needed for my academic career, which is a philosophy of teaching, and things like this, where I can really sit there and say, this is my recipe for teaching. This is how, do steps 1, 2, 3 to get this to happen. Now, does that mean it's going to happen every time? No. But does that mean you're going to have a better margin of error? Is the bullseye getting bigger?
Totally.
Which, especially when we're nervous and, there's just... our throat gets dry, or we start to question what our words are, or any of these kinds of things. We want to give ourselves the best chance, the best chance for success.
Absolutely. Now, is there anything that, as you've sort of gotten more into the days of being a teacher, is there anything that's surprised you? It's a question from Weston.
Oh, thanks, Weston. Yeah, something that surprised me or that I find challenging is sometimes trusting in the process, because sometimes I don't hear the progress I would hope to hear week to week. But I do hear it month to month.
Totally.
Yeah, right? And I think that I was talking with a singer just earlier today who's a really talented baritone, and I was saying, we have to trust this process. And he said to me, I feel my voice deepening over the time that we work. Yeah. And I was like, I agree with you, but I also want to point out that your top is now freer and hot, and you're able to sing higher than you ever have before. I mean, this kid is 20 years old, and he sang an A natural today. That was really impressive. And I told him, when you let go of the base of your tongue like that, you almost sound tenor, because you're not manipulating and kind of manufacturing a baritone sound. And so, I don't want to put labels on whatever it is. We work on light lyric baritone things, Devieni alla finestra, and other stuff like this. but also just, he sings some of these German lied that go up to G's and Ich komme nicht and Flieh mit mir and these other ones. And he sings it really beautifully. I was like, that's the bottom line. You're still in undergrad here, buddy. Totally. Nobody's putting you up for the Met audition next year. We're not making that mistake twice, But just sing healthy and just don't squeeze and don't put so much pressure and just let it be. Let it be what it's going to be. So I would say that's the biggest is trusting when you don't hear the progress that you would hear when you work with a more advanced singer. Or I've worked with a lot of students in the young artist programs in Covent Garden and Paris and other places. And those students are generally older, by almost 10 years sometimes, and they're quicker. And so they just tend to be able to react faster.
Yeah, well, I love what you said about looking month to month and not week to week or moment to moment. Like trying to see trends. I think it was really after the first 2 or 3 years of teaching when I started to see, okay, over a period of time, if the students are practicing and they're understanding what you're doing, there is transformative work that can happen.
Sure.
But if you look at any 2 given weeks, they may have actually backslid a little bit in terms of what they're able to produce. But having faith that over that long arc of time, if they're really understanding the work and they're investing, that it's kind of amazing what's possible.
Absolutely. I was talking with Bill Schumann not that long ago about teaching, because obviously he's been doing it forever. I have not been doing it forever, and so he was asking me how am I finding it and stuff like that. And I was like, well, sometimes the exercise portion gets a little repetitive, and it's just not the most exciting part of the lesson, because I love working the language and the music and some of the other kind of stuff. He's like, yeah, but that's where the voice building is, Brian. And I was like, poof, that's why you've been doing this forever, and you're one of the top teachers of the world, and I'm doing my 3rd year of this. Because of course, that if you do the exercises and you do them well, it's like going to the gym. If you have poor form when you're doing your exercises at the gym, you can injure yourself just like you can injure yourself vocally if you're not doing it right. But if you do it right, those exercises designed to get the voice stronger and to stretch your range and to build your stamina slowly but surely over time.
Well, investing in exercises with great form and technique, it really is a belief in the power or in a person's ability to change. Right? And it's saying, okay, we're going to invest significant time into what's possible. As opposed to just trying to polish up what is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said that before. You can't grow without changing, right? You've got to change something that you're doing right now in order to grow. You can't just keep doing the same thing and expect, because our body actually will find ways to adapt and we will actually get worse, right? So if we're not finding ways to kind of tweak and get the muscles and do all this kind of stuff, then I think we're just, we're just going through the motions. And if there's anything I hate doing, it's just going through the motions. I really want to get in there, and even if someone disagrees with what I'm asking for, what I'm going for, I think that, because it's kind of like there are different aesthetics that people like. It's like red wine, white wine, or Scotch whiskey or Irish whiskey or whatever you want to do, or bourbon whiskey. You know what I mean? There are different kind of somebody might like a little fuller kind of more lower larynx thing, and somebody might want a more, as we talked about, Juan Diego, or even Placido, who had a fuller voice, but sang very much in that same way, but still found a beautiful color to his sound. But anyway, that's kind of a lot of where I am with the teaching and big things on the horizon.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a second, but I wanted to kind of take a little pause, and you've spent the last 3 years here as a faculty member here at Westminster. And just want to see if you have a couple of words to say about Westminster as a place and your experience here.
Well, I love Westminster. It'll always hold a dear place in my heart. I mean, really, it gave me the foundation, as I said, for the knowledge that allowed me to be able to teach, and then also the opportunity to be an artist in residence for 1 year, and then 2 years of teaching a studio, teaching the singing actor, really getting, my hands into the academic experience, which I feel like is so is so helpful. And like, I just really probably would not have found the opportunity to do that if I think we just kind of had a mutual love and respect, our families for each other, and the opportunity for Westminster, I think, to be able to benefit from some of the things. I've done a lot of recruiting, which I've never really done before, but found out that I actually love recruiting, and I love going essentially to high schools to talk to young singers, mainly choir singers, but people who love musicals and love music and love singing, and to just tell them about, I was in your shoes and I was not that different. I just had a talent that I hadn't really been able to explore. And then this whole other world opened up to me that I had no idea even existed. I fell asleep at my first opera when I was a high school senior. Partly because we were in like the nosebleeds section, and I just was too far away. And like, we're just used to being immersed in things. And kids these days, it's even worse. Now, I promise you, if I would have been in the orchestra section or the first 5 rows, I would have loved it.
Hair on fire.
Yeah, precisely.
But I have this fantasy of showing up to, high school choir class, and Bryan Hymel comes in and talks to me and sings, a Neapolitan song at 8 in the morning. And I'm just like,
Yeah, it's fun. It's totally fun. But then it's funny, but it comes full circle because I got to perform as the narrator and Frosch in Der Fledermaus for Westminster. And that was wonderful because I got to be on stage again. It was actually the first time since a long time I had been on stage. And it was a little daunting, but it was so great to just be up there with some of my students and some of my students from Singing Actor, kind of be back behind the curtain with the stage lights on and getting out there and putting a costume on and putting on a funny accent. And it was a wonderful experience. I really, really enjoyed being able to do that. I just want to speak a little bit again to this Masters in Voice Pedagogy program. Irene's doing it right now. She's almost finished, and it's just a wonderful degree program that can be done online. It can be done at your own pace. You could take 1 course a semester. You could take 3 courses a semester. I was able to get mine done in just a little over 2 years. You can take voice lessons, or you don't have to take voice lessons. But it's really, I have to say, in all honesty, it's way more rigorous than I expected. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to get this degree. And then I was like, I have to really work for this. But let's be honest, that's what I wanted.
That's what
I wanted the knowledge. Yeah. I wanted the piece of paper too, for sure. But I wanted the knowledge, and I'm so thankful to Westminster and to you guys for that, and look forward to being a part of it. With Kathy and I going to Toronto this summer, and then hopefully there'll be articles for us to write together and presentations, and it would be awesome.
Well, if this all has a little bit of a kind of summative or kind of culminating quality, it's because Bryan has a pretty significant career development that's just happened, and I know that many of you who have are friends with him online or have seen announcements, you probably have already heard that. Bryan, you want to go ahead and share the news yourself?
So I've accepted a position as associate professor, tenure track, at Indiana University, Jacobs School of Music, and I'm really, really excited to go there. So many of my friends, Weston and Eileen Perez and Larry Brownlee and Kate Lindsay, and just the list goes on of wonderful singers, and also wonderful singers who then went on to a teaching career at IU. That it's really humbling, and I'm honored and thrilled for this, for this opportunity, and I really look forward to it. And there's going to be more exciting things coming, about starting a studio page, and then hopefully trying to come out to the East Coast of New York and maybe teach once or twice a month if we can drum it up. So I mean, it's I'm really excited. I hope you guys are really excited about it too. And yeah, anything else? Any other questions? Any questions out there? I think we got most of them.
Yeah, we were able to work through most of them. I'll just say, I'm so thrilled for you to have this.
Thank you.
Very well deserved.
Thank you.
A continuation of your teaching life. Selfishly, I am really, really sad to be.
Well, I'm sad for that too. I can't. There's no way around it. There's no way around it.
That's been such a gift to have you.
Thank you.
In our lives here the last several years, and of course, this isn't the end of that. It's just going to change a little bit.
Right.
We're moving into another act, and going to see how that ends up looking. But if one thing I'm confident of is that you're going to do amazing things, and that we're all going to stay connected.
Lots more trips to New Orleans and to fun places like that. We'll meet up in New York and do that. But well, it's been such a pleasure for me to host this webinar series for the past 2 years. Looking forward to handing it off to the capable hands of my predecessor, or my follower. How do I say that? The person who's going to come after me. But anyway, we want to keep this going because it's a really wonderful way for us at Westminster to stay in touch with our alum and our community and our supporters. And we thank you so much. And I thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching over the recording, again, thank you so much for putting in the time, and look forward to seeing you sometime in the future. All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Absolutely. Bye.